Hi, this is Joseph with Conscious Collective, and in this video, I want to share about my spiritual journey, my journey of awakening, what put me onto this path, and ultimately what led to the creation of this channel and to this video that I'm now creating. And I've received a lot of questions over the years about my journey, and I actually just finished doing a podcast with someone in which we went deep into this question, so it inspired me to create this video to share more about my experience and share more about the experience of awakening, what I feel awakening is, what it looks like, some of the personal experiences that I've had with this journey, with this process of waking up. And with this, I think this will probably be a longer video. I'm not exactly sure how much I'll share or what will be shared or how long. So it's not prepared, not pre-planned. I just want to share from my heart about my journey and my experience with awakening. And this is something I've also considered writing more about. I have just so many personal experiences in this journey that are very meaningful to me and I think could be meaningful for others. So if you enjoy this video, if what I share resonates with you and you'd like to hear more, please let me know in the comments. Let me know if a book on this or more writings on this is something you'd be interested in. So when I speak about my journey, there was a pivotal moment for me that changed everything. And for everyone, the spiritual journey is different. It's unique to each person. Everyone has their own journey and their own path of waking up, and it can look unique for each person. And for some people, it is a very sudden shift that changes them, some kind of dramatic experience. For other people, it's something more gradual. It's a gentle opening of their mind through one questioning of one thing to questioning another thing to having one experience here, another, until there's this gradual expansion of awareness. For me, it was the former, where I had an experience that completely changed my life. And to put some context into this experience, as a child, as a kid growing up, I was passionate about skateboarding. That was the thing that I was into. For a lot of my youth, my whole thing was I just loved skateboarding. Me and my brothers would skateboard, and it's a beautiful art form, something I still enjoy, but that introduced me to a lot of other things that are often associated with skateboarding and people that skateboard, at least at the time when I was doing it. A lot of people would also be kind of delinquent in the way they lived their lives, smoking weed, drinking, being just anxious, or not anxious, but rebellious kids. So that was my youth. I skateboarded all the time. When I was 12 years old, I was introduced to cannabis, started smoking and drinking, and just wanted to party and skateboard and have fun with my friends. And that was kind of all that I cared about in my childhood. I wasn't very passionate about school or sports or anything like that. And I think initially those experiences of experimenting with cannabis and alcohol gave me an introduction to altered states of consciousness, or perhaps made me more familiar with them, and I know certainly made me more introspective and started my questioning of things a little bit more. But it wasn't until I was 16 when I was introduced to mushrooms that I had a really powerful experience that I don't think would have happened without the mushrooms, though I don't attribute exactly to the mushrooms either, because with any kind of substance like that, there is a period where the experience comes on, it has its peak experience for however long, and then it gradually diminishes and you return to your normal perception of things. So in my experience when I was 16, I ate some mushrooms with two friends of mine. We had a very interesting and unique experience. I remember seeing things like the walls breathing along with me breathing, and different patterns. I could see energy flowing from my body, and all this stuff was really interesting, but it wasn't particularly life-changing. And then when the experience had come and gone many hours later, I wasn't hallucinating, I didn't feel like my perception was really changed by the mushrooms anymore. I felt back to normal. One of my friends and I were laying on a trampoline, and we were looking up at the stars, and out of nowhere, all of a sudden, my vision just became filled with this bright white light. It was a whitish, almost purple light, like a hue of purple, but just an immense white light. The entire field of the stars, of space, everything became colored by this light. And I no longer saw anything around me other than this light. And it just filled my being with so much love. An overwhelming feeling of love, of euphoria, of bliss, of joy, of peace, like I had never felt before. And in that light, I could sense the presence of some beings that I had never met before, yet I had so much love for, and them for me. And yet still all I could see was this light, and it just felt like love. It felt like truth. I felt one with everyone and everything. I felt like whatever this light is and was the deepest truth of life that I had experienced. And really no words can even come close to communicating what I felt in that light. This pervasive feeling of love, of oneness, of joy, of bliss. And as I felt this, I started to rise out of my body towards that light. And the thought occurred that I was dying. I felt like I was dying and that I was going up to the light, something that I often have heard with near-death experiences or people that have died and come back, that there is this drifting towards this light. And in that experience, when I felt like I was dying, I didn't feel fear, I didn't feel afraid at all. I felt just joy, just that love. I just felt like I was returning to this source of love. And as I got closer and closer to the light, the experience intensified, and I felt like I was merging with the light. And right before I finally merged with it, right before I finally died in the experience, a voice came in, I think from those beings that I was sensing, or from somewhere. A voice came in and said, "You cannot die yet, it's not your time." And I dropped back down into my body, and it was like immediately my entire perception had changed. It's like a light bulb had been turned on inside of me. There's a quote that comes to mind with this. It's like a mind that has been stretched by new experience can never return to its old dimensions. And so that experience, it just completely stretched my consciousness. And I felt like I was awake. I all of a sudden started questioning, what was that light that I experienced? What is life? Who am I? What is this experience? What's going on here? And I started to recognize that nobody really knew what was going on here. My family, my friends, my school, my education, the people that I saw in society around me, nobody seemed to really know what was happening or what they were doing or what life was or who they were. Everyone's just kind of going along with the motions, doing their own things, going through this system of education and getting a job and then having a home and then retiring, and nobody seems to stop to question or think or talk about these deeper truths about who are we, what is life, what are we all doing here. And I just became intensely curious about it after that experience. I had glimpsed something that was deeper than anything I had experienced before, and it completely changed me. It opened my mind to realize that I didn't know anything about life, and nobody around me seemed to know anything either. And I had this impression that there were some people that didn't want us to know. I had never heard this before or had anyone talk about it. It was just this sense that how could we not be questioning? How could we not be aware of life? How could we not question these deeper truths or whatever that truth is that I experienced? It felt like somehow there were some force did not want people to know that, and benefited from us being ignorant of these deeper truths. And that led to many different rabbit holes of exploration, but it was the intuition I felt at the time that we are not aware of the truth of our human nature, and there's perhaps a reason for that, or a reason why we aren't aware, or that's not common or welcomed in our culture. But nevertheless, after that experience, I remember one of the first immediate changes that I had was I started to see the being within other people. So when I was talking to my friends afterwards, and pretty much ever since then, whenever I talk to anyone, whenever I look at anyone, even if it's an animal or an insect, I can recognize that there is a living being there. There's a person, there's a being having their own unique experience through that lens, through that body. And that was something I noticed immediately that changed, as I just started seeing that same awareness in others, whether it was in my friends or my family or one of my pets or anyone. I noticed that living being, that presence within them that was, I could identify as similar to the presence in everyone, that there's that consciousness experiencing through each of our bodies as each of us. So that gave me a lot more compassion for other people. It made me start to have more kindness and more empathy with the experiences of others. But really, after that moment, after that experience, I just became intensely curious. It was like a fire had been lit inside of me where I just wanted to know. I just wanted to know more about life and what it was, who I was, what that truth was that I experienced, that thing that felt like the deepest truth I had ever experienced in my life up to that point. And in our Western modern culture, science is often seen as the main authority for truth. So I started to read and research different scientific fields for a little bit. I had these textbooks at my house. I remember I started reading a biology textbook, an astronomy textbook. I had an oceanography textbook. I had a geology textbook. And I just started reading these different textbooks, like just as ordinary books, reading them through. And I remember it being really interesting, but it just felt like I was getting little glimpses of aspects of nature that had infinite depth to them, but it wasn't what I was looking for. I wanted something more whole, something more holistic, something that was more fundamental to my experience, and not just taking me on these deep journeys into different details of things. So I stopped reading the science textbooks, and I remember had the thought that maybe Buddhism has it figured out. So I looked up Buddhist books on the internet, and I found one called The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I ordered the book. I remember as soon as I got it, I started reading it, and immediately the words that he was saying were resonating so deeply with me and were reflecting some of the truth that I had recognized in my experience. And it was the most I had ever felt moved emotionally by a book. And every word of that book was just resonating very deeply. And that sparked this curiosity and this interest in Eastern philosophy and really spirituality as a whole. I didn't have a previous background of being raised in a certain religion necessarily. My father was raised Catholic. My mother was not raised in a church kind of environment at all. And so we had a pretty neutral upbringing as far as religion and spirituality came. And so I didn't really have a context to put that experience that I had into. I didn't have any sense of spirituality or religion. So this book on Buddhism was my first introduction to spirituality, and it started to answer some of the questions that I was having about life and gave me somewhat of an avenue to further explore. So I remember I just started reading all sorts of books on Buddhism, books on Hinduism, on yoga, on Vedanta, on shamanism, on Taoism, on quantum physics, and really anything that I felt could give me a deeper understanding of this truth. I obsessively read, and that led me to start exploring yoga and meditation and some of these qigong, martial arts, some of these different practices that were more embodying of this information. And it also inspired me to share, because I didn't feel like I could relate with anyone after the experience that I had. I tried telling some of my friends about it. I remember hinting at it a little bit towards my parents, and the responses that I got from my friends and family when I spoke about some of the things I was noticing or thinking about, I was they immediately just reacted with like concern or questioning, or looked at me like I was weird or strange for thinking that way. And it very quickly to me communicated that I couldn't talk about this with other people, at least not people that I knew. So it was challenging to start to have that awareness and not be able to integrate it or talk about it. And what helped me a lot was reading and writing. I found refuge in the books that I would read. I found a lot of freedom in the expression of writing and writing down some of the thoughts and insights I was having. And I felt inspired to share what I was learning because it felt so important and meaningful to me. And it felt so essential for us to start to question these things about life, about being a human being, about nature, about the government and their role in our existence, all these different aspects of the human experience I was learning about and I wanted to share more about nutrition and health, all of these things. So I first created the Instagram account Conscious Collective, and that was in November of 2012. And I think I was my junior year of high school, so I very privately had this Instagram account and would post on it every day, write my thoughts on it, share on it, and it started to grow gradually. And I started writing books. I remember the first book I wrote, it's like, I just want this information to get to people. I don't care if I'm not an author, if I don't have degrees, if I don't have the qualifications, or if I'm not the most qualified. I just wanted to share information with people and help people wake up to things. So with that kind of spirit, I started writing books. I started posting more in Conscious Collective, and throughout the years, that's continually grown to, I've written now 9 books and created a bunch of different posts and videos and content, and continue to do so because of that desire to share the knowledge that I was waking up to and realizing was adding so much transformation and meaning to me, that I felt this is the stuff that humanity needs to know and needs to be aware of. So I felt this duty to share it, and still do. And I'm still on that journey of feeling inspired to share this knowledge and information with others. But in my experience at the time, I remember exploring all of these different teachings, all of these different traditions for a couple years. I read a lot about Buddhism and a lot about yoga and different philosophy, and went to yoga classes and meditation classes and things like this. And I just wanted something deeper. I wanted more experience. So I had a roommate at the time who had gone traveling to Costa Rica, and that opened up this idea to me that I could travel. It never really occurred to me or felt like something that I could do, but I realized, like, hey, I can actually just go travel somewhere and if I want to. And so I really wanted the experience of international travel, of going somewhere to one of these cultures or traditions. And the one that spoke to me at the time was an experience in Peru with the Paititi Institute. It was a 33-day shamanic permaculture design course. So permaculture is also something I was learning about and continued to explore further, which is a design system that has to do with agriculture, has to do with human settlements, and it's ultimately a system of design that is intended to help human beings live harmoniously with our environment, and looking at all of the aspects that relates to. So it typically shows up as gardening and self-sufficiency, and it also reflects into society and in our culture and our ways of relating with people socially. And It's a very beautiful system, and one that I think offers a lot of answers towards a lot of the problems that we're facing today. So I wanted to learn more about it. I was also very drawn to ayahuasca at the time because I had such a powerful experience with mushrooms and had a few powerful experiences with them. I wanted to experience some kind of psychedelic experience being in the context of a ceremony, doing it with someone that was facilitating it, that was guiding it, instead of me just kind of rolling the dice with myself or with friends of mine. And so this course was available, and I it was a big deal for me to travel by myself to Peru. So before I did it, the Paititi Institute happened to be traveling in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and I lived in the Seattle, Washington area at the time, and I remember driving down there so that I could kind of get a feel for this group and what they were offering, and they were doing a shamanic breathwork course at the time. So that was my first introduction to breathwork, which also became a big part of my journey later on, and had a powerful experience with these breathing practices, and it gave me a sense of who Roman and Cynthia were, the people behind the Paititi Institute, and I felt affirmed in my experience. I felt like, yes, I want to do this. I want to go to Peru and have this experience. And so I think I was 20 at the time, and I traveled to Peru by myself with just my backpack. When I first got there, I did some trekking, and I did a trek to Machu Picchu, and then I met in a town called Pisac with the Paititi Institute, and we took a bus 4 hours to a really small village, and then got dropped off with all our stuff and hiked down with all our gear, I think 2 miles down, crossed the river, another mile up into where their community is. And I spent 33 days there, sleeping in my tent, immersed in this community, doing lots of permaculture and gardening and sitting with ayahuasca in San Pedro. And it was such an expansive experience for me that not only in the experiences themselves that I had and like the ceremonies and through the travel, but also being with other people that were on their own journey of waking up and being able to connect and relate and have a sense of community that I had never felt before. So after that, I returned to the States, and I was very inspired. I feel like I had the travel bug. Like I just wanted to travel more and experience more. And so I worked for a while, and I saved up money so that I could go on another experience. And I planned out this very extensive journey where, as a whole, the structure of it, I went to Guatemala, Peru, India, Nepal, and China in a span of just over 4 months. And my intention was to go to these different cultures, to experience the different spiritual traditions of these cultures, to see, for one, just to experience them more in immersive sense and where they come from and with teachers and those lineages, but also to feel if there was one that resonated with me the most that I might want to pursue further. So I went to Guatemala with a friend of mine, and I spent a month in a meditation center, and it was a mystery school meditation center, so they taught a lot of things about the like esoteric spiritual practices, things like astral travel and alchemy and lucid dreaming and the Kabbalah, and very interesting teachings. And after a month there, I also immersed in some Mayan culture and got to experience some traditional cacao ceremonies and connect with a Mayan shaman there. And after that, I parted ways from my friend that I was with, and I went to Peru for the second time. And this time I went to the jungle in Iquitos, and I did a 14-day ayahuasca retreat where we sat in 4 different ceremonies. And I had some very, as one could probably imagine, I had some very deep experiences in that retreat. And maybe I'll come back and touch on some of them. I don't want to go into too much detail or spend too much time on this part, but I will share some of the main lessons that I got from that. I think with these plant medicines like mushrooms or ayahuasca, they're extremely powerful, and the right intention, the right setting, and environment that they are taken in is of extreme importance. I don't typically talk much about mushrooms or ayahuasca. They played a really pivotal role for me earlier on in my journey, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. But I also feel that they are very great at revealing deeper truths to us, but it's kind of like a glimpse into a deeper reality. We consume these medicines, they can provide a deep insight into the nature of reality, and then we're back with ourselves in our ordinary perception, and we can draw a lot of wisdom from the experience that we had, but really it's kind of like a shortcut, and it's people have the run the risk of becoming dependent on these other substances for these deeper experiences and just keep chasing after greater highs and greater experiences and using these plant medicines as a medium to have them. Whereas the truth is not found in a mushroom, it's not found in ayahuasca, it's not found in anything outside of ourselves. All of the spiritual traditions, most of them throughout history, have always pointed us inwards to this realization that truth is within ourselves, and we can wake up to it within ourselves, and we don't need anything outside of us to have that realization. So more and more on my journey, I've grown to appreciate a more grounded approach to spiritual awareness, because we can take something that can blast us off to this very high state and then we crash and fall back down. Whereas if we practice like mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and integrating this deeper awareness into all of our experiences, we can gradually come to that greater awareness of things and rest in that and sustain it without crashing down from that high experience that we were in. And this is not to negate the plant medicines either, because I know in modern culture there are a lot of people that look at those kind of things as just drugs, and any realization or insight that you had was just because of the influence of the drugs. It's part of also the reason I don't share about them that much either, is because I think people can kind of negate or discount what was realized. And it is tricky, because a lot of what we do realize is a reflection of our mind, but I think we just get deeper insights into that on a somewhat scientific level. I think what I've come to understand that these substances do is we have part of our brain, particularly this reticular formation in our nerves, that takes in all of the information that we experience and then filters it out to tell our brain what is relevant, what to focus on, what's important. Because if we were aware of everything all the time, it'd be really overwhelming. So we have these built-in filters, but those are also very conditioned by our upbringing, conditioned by our culture, conditioned by our past experiences. So all of the information that we're perceiving is being filtered, and what we are actually experiencing is a very small fraction of the total truth around us. And what these plant medicines do is they directly affect that part of the brain that filters out all of that information. So our conditioning, our conditioned filters are kind of relaxed, and we are able to have that perception of so much more information, so many more patterns and energetic aspects to the reality that we typically don't experience. And so that allows for these deep awarenesses, our deep insights into deeper truths about nature. So with that, I think that they should be respected highly, because if they're not taken it with the right respect or in the right setting, it can do more harm than good. And some people have a real challenge with integrating the experiences that they have back into their daily life and society. So I don't typically advocate for them, and if one is inspired to sit with any of these plant medicines, I really encourage you to do so in the right setting, ideally with someone that can guide and hold the space for that experience so that it's done safely and so that there's space for discussion and integration afterwards. It's really, really important for that kind of work. It's certainly not a drug to take just for fun, because the experiences are typically extremely challenging at some points and can be really uncomfortable. So with all that said, disclaimers and whatnot, I think one of the experiences in particular that I had was something that I still reflect on often. And it was a lot of my journey up to that point. I was seeking to get back to that state of oneness that I had experienced, this awareness of what I think people refer to as God or spirit or pure consciousness or Brahman or Atman or so many different names for this reality. And having experienced it, I just wanted to go back there. I wanted to have that experience again, and I was looking for that experience in so many different things. And when I was there the second time in Peru, sitting with ayahuasca, I had the deepest experience I've ever had of that, to where I did not feel like I was here and that spirit or God was outside of me, but I was God. I am God in that moment. We are all a part of God, of this deeper energy. And in that moment, I had an awareness of myself as God in this body. So me as Joseph, as the individual ego mind that I typically feel myself to be and operate as, was completely absent. And all that was there was this deep awareness of God as God experiencing itself in my body. And it's very difficult to try to actually communicate that, but that's the best I can do. And as this awareness, in this awareness of God as God, there was this desire to experience life through me, through my body and mind. And sort of the lesson or the insight I got with that is, I had been spending all this time trying to get to this awareness of God and spirit, and when I was finally in that, spirit wanted to have an experience through me. And I got this kind of insight that that's what the spirit is doing through all beings, through all of us, everywhere, is it's having that experience of itself through us. And that's the desire that it had. And so it was kind of like a 180 shift in my experience, where I came back into my human body as this being, the deeper awareness of this beingness within me. So that helped me shift my awareness or my focus, I wouldn't say necessarily back to my human experience, but including my human experience as well as this deeper spiritual nature. So it wasn't me negating my humanness to get to spirit. It was an awareness that I am spirit and I am human, and spirit is having a human experience through me, and to honor that. So that was a huge shift for me. And also something I had in one of those experiences was another different ceremony. I was in that state again, and it's very difficult to describe because it's beyond the ability of language to communicate, really. But I was in a state of pure beingness on a very deep level, where I was in that spirit, in that presence of spirit, and as such, I felt total contentment, absolute peace, absolute contentment and joy, just being. I didn't need anything. Nothing could take away from this or add to it. I just was in this state of being and peace. And in that, I started to be able to notice my mind as another entity. It was like didn't have a defined form. It was kind of like just this squiggle of energy, but I saw it as my mind. And the mind would flow and move, and then it would open up this portal, and it would show a timeline of my life, and it said, if you entertain this one thought, this is the direction that your life will go. And kind of tempting me to be like, come, entertain this thought and see what a wonderful life you can have if you follow that. And I felt so much peace in myself that I just said, no thank you. I choose to stay right here. And so then the mind would kind of shape shift and move and then open up a different timeline and say, entertain this thought, and this is the path that your life will follow. And I just kept saying, no thank you, I choose to stay. Because I felt like, for one, nothing that the mind promised me could be any better than the joy and peace I was feeling right here. So, for one, I didn't see anything that it was offering me as being better than what I was already experiencing, but I also had this sense that the mind was like this trickster, that it was this energy that was trying to tempt me out of my peace and experience by entertaining the thoughts that it was showing me. And I just kept denying that and saying, no thank you, I choose to stay. And that allowed for a very deep relaxation into this peace, this deeper presence of spirit and the contentment in that. And that was a really powerful experience in the moment. And the lesson from that continued to carry with me. And I think it was one of the most significant experiences in that regard, in that I can recognize now to this day, all the time, throughout life, moment by moment, the mind is always conjuring up thoughts and ideas and beliefs and trying to give the sense that these are so important, that it's really important that I think this thought, and really important that I entertain this idea, and really important that I figure this thing out or plan this thing or am able to judge this or understand this. And there's this constant energy from the mind that's like tempting me to entertain it, to become lost in thought. And whenever I do, that takes me away from my actual present moment experience. And it's only in this present moment experience where I can actually truly live and experience life and experience happiness and joy and peace and freedom. None of that comes in the future or in the past. It's only available now. And yet the mind is always trying to invite me or invite us into the future and past. And so I've seen that theme continually show up. And it's been a great reminder and practice for me to notice my mind doing that and to keep coming back to myself, coming back to my breath, coming back to the present moment, and knowing that peace is here. It's not in the promises of the mind. And I think that's a huge challenge for a lot of people is we're under this impression, because of our mind and because of a lack of awareness of our mind, we have this idea that happiness is external and it's dependent on our circumstances. And even those of us that may know this or think we know better, we still get caught in this idea that happiness is something that's going to come to me in the future. Once I have the home that I want, once I have the relationship that I want, once I have the material things I want, or I've traveled to the place I want, or experienced the thing I want, whatever the want is, we have some kind of want in the future, and we think that once I get that thing, then I'll be happy. And not only is it not entirely true, because we get the thing we desired, and maybe we're happy for a moment, but time keeps going, life keeps going, and then we become disinterested with that thing, or it starts to have its own problems, and we start to be unhappy again. And so we look for the next thing, and we chase after the next thing, and we're constantly under this impression from our minds that happiness is found in something outside of us in the future. And it's just not the truth. Happiness is a state of being, and therefore is within us, and it's not dependent on anything outside of us. And as long as we think that it is, not only will our happiness be limited to that thing, and will we suffer when we don't have that thing, but it's also preventing us from realizing the happiness that's available to us right now. Because if I think happiness is something in the future, that means I'm not happy right now. And often we're chasing happiness in the future to try to escape some of the feelings that we're feeling right now. Feelings of isolation, of loneliness, of anxiety, of depression, of anger, of fear. So much inner turmoil that a lot of us experience as human beings. And we try to seek for things outside of us to provide relief. We end up chasing after pleasure and pushing away pain. And so we may chase pleasure in different experiences, in movies and drugs and social media and our phones and relationships and all kinds of different things. We seek for this pleasure and escape from pain, and we get caught in that often, not realizing that there is deeper happiness and freedom available within us. Instead of trying to get away from our experience, if we can learn how to fully be here with our experience and allow it to be, we can wake up to an aspect of us that is transcendent of whatever we're experiencing. Whether I'm experiencing pleasure or pain, that is happening within the field of this consciousness that I am. And if I can relax into that consciousness and just be, I can have incredible peace and freedom regardless of what my circumstances have or I'm experiencing in my circumstances. So that truth is something that I had continued and still continue to wake up to. But that moment, the ayahuasca experience, was a very powerful one in helping me to realize that. And all of the different things that I've experienced, I think, are like little threads that help to weave the entire web of my life experience. And I really thank Thich Nhat Hanh and his books and mindfulness teachings for guiding me, I think, in many of those experiences, because even after that first book that I read, and something in that talked about mindfulness, which has many definitions, but I think a good one is that it is mindfulness is paying attention in the present moment without judgment. So it's being aware of whatever we experience moment by moment without judging it, without reacting to it, without seeing it as good or bad or adding any conceptual layers or any thoughts or opinions. It's just being aware of what is as it is without our interpretation of it. And that is very freeing because it starts to free us from our mind and its constant judgment and interpretations, and helps us see things more deeply, more truly as they are. And one of the main mindfulness practices is mindfulness of breath. Mindfulness of our breath as it comes in and goes out. And if we become aware of that, we can start to breathe and relax and be more calm, breathe more calmly, and that helps our mind to be more relaxed. As simple as that is, it's true, and it's very profound to realize, especially for those of us that have never realized how our breath shapes our mental state. So I remember in one of the mushroom experiences I had when I think it was several months after that first one, I had been reading Thich Nhat Hanh books, and I started to realize that even without the mushrooms, I was realizing how my breath influences my mind. It was just very amplified in that experience. And I noticed that whenever I wasn't breathing calmly, everything around me seemed to be kind of chaotic. And that could have been through my own inner chaotic state, projecting that outwards, but also there was just no like harmonious energy in the space. I was in a room with several friends that were also taking mushrooms and experiencing that together. And I just remember laying there and focusing on my breath and breathing. And then whenever I stayed with that really calm and relaxed breath, everything around me seemed and felt very harmonious. Like the people around me seemed to be really calm and relaxed. But when I stopped focusing on my breath and got carried away, it seemed like that peace was lost and everything was kind of chaotic again until I started breathing calmly. And how I interpreted that in the moment was that the strongest or most constant kind of energy in a space shapes and influences the energy of that space. And when nobody's aware of their breathing or their thinking and it's kind of just chaotic energy, that's what's flowing in that space. But as soon as you introduce a constant, calm, steady rhythm and energy, that gives a powerful energy for other things to attune to. And that helps to kind of create the space, create the dominant energy in that space. So that's what I was doing that whole experience. And in a very deep and profound way, for what felt like hours, I was just sitting and breathing calmly and feel like I was holding the space for that experience. I was holding the space for the energy, or holding that energy for the room, and creating a stable source of peace for other things to attune to. And that awareness has also continued to become more refined as I've grown, but that was my first insight into it, something I wanted to touch on. So a little bit all over the place, Again, this isn't pre-planned or structured. I'm just expressing and speaking from my heart. So after the Peru experience and the ayahuasca retreat that I went to India immediately after, which was such a shock to my nervous system, coming from being in the jungle in a very remote place with plant medicines to being in a very chaotic country with lots of people and lots of cars honking horns and motorbikes and monkeys and cows and people on the streets begging and pollution and people chanting and praying and ceremonies and celebrating, and it's just so full that it was a huge shock to my nervous system when I got there. And in hindsight, I realized I did not give myself enough space between my experiences to integrate. I just over planned things, and I made it so immediately after my ayahuasca ceremonies, I went straight into a yoga teacher training, still integrating all of those lessons, and it was a bit difficult to do. And it was also helpful though. Yoga helped me move energy and connect with my body and my breath even deeper. And India in itself was just a beautiful place to be with so many different lessons. I remember feeling very overwhelmed a lot of the time in the stimulus of India and learning how to relax and surrender to being out of control, because there would be moments where I'm crossing a bridge, for example, and it's just so full of people and chaos and motorbikes trying to cross the bridge and cows trying to cross the bridge and monkeys reaching for my stuff and people begging for money, and it was just so much stimulus. And I was crossing this bridge and I couldn't move. I was stuck in the crowd, just like pushing my way through for an hour, which should have taken 5 minutes. And I remember experiences like that, just being in that and just surrendering and allowing it to be. And there was a lot of beauty that came through that. And I think just traveling in general creates a lot of freedom. It had for me, because we are all raised in the culture that we're raised in, unless you have a uncommon experience of being raised in many different cultures. For the most part, many people, most of us, are raised in the culture that we are born in, and we're conditioned by that culture. The values that we have, the beliefs that we have, the way that we see things is very much shaped by our family, by our culture, and because we are so immersed in that and that's all we know, we don't really question it, and we don't realize that it's just one perspective. And we kind of assume that that's just the way the world is. And when you travel to different cultures and see that those people have an entirely different worldview and perspective, and then travel to another culture where they have an even entirely different culture and perspective, that was starting to make me really see just how much our cultural conditioning shapes our experiences. Because even the shamans that I stayed with in Peru, even the yoga teachers that I met in India, and the swamis that I talked with, and the other places I went to on my journey, even the deep, wise beings of those places were still very much seeing through the lens of their culture. And that was very insightful for me, and I think a very unique experience to be able to go to these different cultures like that, to see, wow, like we are all so conditioned by society, and to really wake up from that conditioning and see things clearly is a challenge. It requires a lot of unlearning and letting go of what we think things are and opening up to deeper truths about what actually is. So anyways, I went from India to Nepal, and I spent a month in Nepal, and I spent 2 weeks at a monastery there called the Kopan Monastery, and this was an entirely different flavor of spirituality and culture, and this was an immersion into Buddhism, and a specific type of Buddhism, because there's so many different expressions of it. This was in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, in the Gelug tradition, I think, and they were very intellectual in their practices and a lot of visualizations, and they had us reflect a lot on impermanence. And this, at the time, wasn't a new theme to me, but it was where it sunk in the deepest up to that point, was this recognition of just how impermanent our experiences are, or everything is. my body is ever changing. Not only will I, not only are things impermanent in the sense that they will eventually change, but impermanent in the sense that they are constantly changing, and nothing is actually static. We tend to look at the world as different objects and things, and we have language that reinforces that. We have nouns, so we look at things as nouns. We even look at people as nouns. We look at everything as a thing. But when you really look at it, it's not a thing, it's a verb. It's an ever-changing phenomena that's always flowing, and we are the same. We have ever-changing thoughts, ever-changing emotions, ever-changing moods, ever-changing physical sensations, and that meditation retreat gave me a deep glimpse into that, to recognize that ever-changing flow. And it brought up a lot, as I'm sure one could imagine. It brought up things about the nature of death, the inevitability of my own physical death, the death of my family and friends. And not only it felt kind of sad, but it also really made me feel gratitude. And I think that's the great function of reflecting on our impermanence, is that it helps one to see that this moment now is precious, that our lives as they are precious. Because everything's temporary, everything's incredibly sacred. Nothing will be the way that it is, again, as it is right now. And so I think that really helped me to relax a little bit and not rush through my life so much, which I still get caught up in doing. But I remember, again, that this is a temporary experience, and I want to be fully present with it. I don't want to be so caught in my mind and my goals and planning and chasing after things that I wake up in my older years and realize I never fully lived. So that was a really powerful experience for me too. And after Nepal, I went to China, and in China I stayed for 3 weeks at a Tai Chi school and the Wudang Mountains, which was just overall a wonderful experience. The mountains there are very beautiful and preserved as a historic site. So there's ancient temples and stone pathways, and I felt like I was in a movie, like a kung fu movie, like running up the stairs to the temple. And it was a nice relief from being in India and Nepal, which are just very full of people and stimulus, to being in the remote mountains practicing Tai Chi with myself, the teacher, and one other student. And that helped me learn how to balance more the Tai Chi and feel more receptive to the energies of nature. And I remember we would practice the same Tai Chi pattern, but every time I practiced it, every place that I practiced it, the flow would be different. And so it was like I was responding to the environment in the moment in which I was in. And I just found that to be very interesting and valuable insight in the moment, that moment by moment it's different, and the balance and flow of energy is different, and it just helped me be a little more receptive to that. And so when I went on this journey, one of the things I also did was, because I was going to all these places, I felt it was a very unique opportunity to also interview different spiritual teachers in these places. And so I got that idea, and it led to me creating a documentary called All Is Self, which you may, if you're watching this, may or may not have seen, but it's on this channel. And that was the culmination of that journey. And I'm very thankful I got to interview different teachers, because it also created this unique situation where I was able to sit with a lot of different teachers and just ask them questions, ask them about the journey, ask them about their worldview and philosophy, and see how they all kind of weave together into this recognition, what I recognized and called the documentary All Is Self. So we have typically in our culture a sense of self being separate from nature. We feel like I am here and the world is out there. And that just seems obvious to us. But it's on a consciousness level, it's actually this split that we have, this sense that we are separate from nature, from life. And there's a survival function to that. It's the function of our ego. It allows us to distinguish self from other so that we can survive and navigate, but it also prevents us from recognizing the actual truth in that we are not separate from life. We are life. We're not separate from nature. We are nature. We're not separate from the universe. We are the universe. But we are a unique expression of it. So these two realms exist at the same time, where we are individual and we are one, one with everything. We're all. And so what I found through all of these different traditions and experiences is that all of them, at their core, acknowledge that we are one. There is a deep truth within our being. I'm trying to find the right way to word this, because on the physical level, we are one in the sense that we are all interconnected and interdependent with nature and our environment. So we are of the earth. If the earth is polluted, then our bodies are polluted. If we destroy the forests and trees that produce the air that we breathe, we don't breathe air and we get sick. So we're very much interconnected with the web of life, the web of nature. But on a deeper level within us, there is a dimension of our being that is beyond the physical world that we perceive and experience. It's this domain of consciousness. And within that, we are also all one. And this is what is referred to in so many different ways. In Hinduism, it's referred to as the self, or Brahman, or Atman. In Taoism, they call it the Tao. In Buddhism, it's referred to as our Buddha nature. And so many different names in different cultures. But they recognize that there's this source of life that is within all of us. And one of the best analogies I can make for that is it's like the ocean. And we are all individual waves. And the wave gets a sense of identity and thinks that it's separate from the ocean, when it ultimately only is the ocean. And so that's a big part of what I think this journey of awakening is. It's waking up from that misperception that we are just a separate wave, and recognizing that we are actually the entire ocean expressed as a wave. And then to learn how to honor both of those, to honor our life as an individual wave, and never to forget that deeper truth that we are also the ocean. And there's so much freedom that comes from that realization. And I think I'll circle back to that in a little bit here, because that's the essence of what I have come to realize, I think, through all of this and want to share. But I want to touch back into some of the personal journey as it's unfolding. So after China, I came back to the States, and at the time I had moved out of my where I was living with my friends to go on that traveling journey. And when I came back home, I stayed with my family in Washington, and they were moving to Arizona. And so they asked if I wanted to come, and I said, yeah, I think I'm ready for something different. And I ended up moving from Washington State to Arizona, and I had some really wonderful experiences exploring Sedona when I got there. I had a couple of friends that had already gone there a lot of times, and Sedona is a very beautiful, magical, powerful place for those that have or haven't been there. And I had a lot of wonderful experiences just hiking and being in the nature of Sedona there. And after several months of living in Arizona, I went back to India to do deeper yoga trainings, and came back to the States, and then I applied for and was accepted to a internship on Orcas Island in Washington State at the Bullock Brothers Permaculture Homestead. So they used to offer, after the COVID pandemic, they stopped their whole program that they were doing. But for 40 years, they were offering these internships, and it was essentially you go and live on this property for an entire growing season. So I got there in March, and I left in November. And during that entire time, I slept outside. I slept on a little wooden platform with a tarp and no walls, just in the forest. And I slept in on a sleeping mat, sleeping bag, and just a mosquito net around me. And it was very amazing, really, to be living outside, sleeping outside, and being a part of the land. And every day I worked, and I had 6 garden beds that I maintained, and then we had the entire property that we were maintaining as a community, doing, pruning the different fruit trees in the spring, making new garden beds, and setting up irrigation systems, then maintaining and growing all the crops, and harvesting and canning and storing. And it was a very deep immersion into this lifestyle of living off-grid on a permaculture homestead, which is something I had always really dreamed about and got to experience, and it was beautiful, and it was very helpful to integrate things and just be so closely connected with the earth, and to recognize, a fruit tree that fruit tree I'd been maintaining all year was producing fruit now. Gardens that I had planted in spring were now bearing their fruits and vegetables, and I actually felt like a part of my environment for the first time, and not just like a bystander that's living on the earth, but I'm actually living with it, which felt very deeply nourishing on a soul level. And one of the things that inspired me to do that was when I was in Nepal, especially. I noticed it in other places too, but when I was in Nepal, I remember being at this monastery, and the Buddhist teachings were very beautiful, and a lot of it talked about love and compassion to all beings. And yet they had a very poor waste management system, where there was a lot of pollution and a lot of like garbage piling up and things that were harming the nearby environment, which was directly harming living beings. So as they're praying for the all beings to be happy and free of suffering, their actions were perhaps unaware of it. They were creating suffering. And I felt this huge disconnect with a lot of the places I went to, where they recognize our oneness and speak about our oneness, but in actual daily life, it doesn't seem like that truth's being honored. And so I wanted an immersion into like, how can I live sustainably on the earth in a way that actually doesn't harm living beings? And I thought that permaculture experience would offer it. And in a way it did. It showed how it's possible to live totally harmoniously with nature, but also how challenging it is, especially coming from our culture, because even there they were very self-sufficient for the most part, but still relied on gas to power certain tools, and still used resources for different things, and plastics and stuff like that. And also I noticed, because I had also had this intention, I want to be of benefit to all living beings. I don't want to contribute to harm or to suffering. And so when I was gardening, I remember creating a garden bed, and to do so I had to dig up a field, and I was digging out chunks, flipping them, breaking it up to try to break up the soil. And as I was doing it, every single shovel is killing a bunch of different living beings, worms and pill bugs and ants and spiders and all sorts of things. I'm disrupting and disturbing so that I can make this garden bed that can sustain me and the community. And it was this weird ethical dilemma where I've learned there are some less invasive methods of gardening, like no-till gardening, but still there was this dilemma where I wanted to support the community and help sustain us in a sustainable way, but to do so I need to harm these other living beings. And that's actually just an inescapable truth about being alive in nature, and that life feeds on life. And whether one is vegetarian or vegan or eats a meat-based diet, or whatever diet we live, whatever lifestyle we live, we sustain ourselves through other living beings. And it was very interesting to just in a very practical way realize that I can't escape that fact. And so I do desire to be very mindful of it and live in a way that can be as least harmful for other beings, and hopefully also live a life that contributes a lot to other beings, but just recognizing life as a whole is constantly changing and weaving together, and it's got life and death and beauty and sadness and all of these different aspects that are a part of the experience of being alive on the earth. So that 8-month immersion was really powerful for me, and a lot of different lessons came through just being outside and immersed in nature like that. And it's something I still desire. I would still love to have a property that I can grow food and live harmoniously with, but that's not my current reality. Uh, so after that experience, trying to reflect on where I'm at in the journey, actually, before that experience, I I discovered breath work again, and that was something that was also very significant for me and something I feel inspired to share about. I went to a music festival. It was the Oregon Eclipse Festival. So I think it was 2017 or 18, and there was the eclipse was happening. It's a really big festival in Oregon, and I went to it, and that in itself was a powerful experience for me because I just went by myself and was there and was just open, and um, it was beautiful. So many people there, and such a disconnect in a weird way of like half the people were very consciousness focused and earth focused and healing focused, and the other half were just trying to like party and take drugs, and it was weird to see this kind of like split in the event. But anyway, I discovered a breathwork workshop there, and I went to it, and I had a powerful experience. I felt very deeply meditative, and it was moving for me, but it was more so hearing the people around me. There were people that were just in tears, crying, and yelling and screaming, and like so much was being moved through them. It was very moving for me. Like, wow, this stuff's powerful. So the teacher, his name's Michael Brian Baker with the Breath Center, is his organization. They were offering a teacher training in Ojai, California, and at the time I had no money except for like I was just barely getting by to get to that place. And I remember they had I'm trying to think of the order that it happened. I just remember that I was looking at plane tickets, and I think it was like $151.03 was the plane ticket, and I had 151.04. I just had like 1 penny, and I remember 1 penny extra. I bought it, and the whole experience was like that for initially, and it was a beautiful experience of synchronicity and trusting in life. And I didn't know, okay, I bought the ticket, but I still can't afford the program, or still don't know how I'm going to get down there, but I'm going to figure it out, and just trusting like step by step. And I remember going down there and having all of these synchronicities. Like at the time, I still feel this sometimes, but especially then, that the like angel numbers were really speaking to me. I remember my train was the 777, and I got to my hotel and it was the 111, and like all these little things seemed like they were like breadcrumbs on my journey. And I went to this breathwork teacher training, and it was so powerful, this practice that I learned, and practicing it with the people, that I was so inspired by it, because it was the thing that I felt created the most impactful change in the most rapid sense. I still often focus on mindfulness and meditation and what I share about, because I think it's so foundational and fundamental. But I love sharing breathwork practices with people too, particularly this breathwork practice, because it is like an inner journey. It's like almost like a ayahuasca or mushroom ceremony in itself, using our breath to get into an altered state of consciousness and to move energy. And people start having these very physical, somatic experiences, like emotional releases, where a deep emotion stored somewhere in the body gets moved and released, and people cry and they yell and they laugh and they shake, and they just are moving and releasing all this energy and having profound experiences. So I remember after that going home and just sharing it with anybody that was interested, and not charging for it, and just seeing if anyone wanted to learn this practice or hear what they're talking about, and saying, well, I know something that might be able to help with that, and guiding people through these powerful experiences. And I started doing workshops with it, and two friends and I started doing retreats in Sedona. We led 2 retreats where people came and did breath work and hiking and meditation and yoga and all these beautiful things. And then the 2020 came around with the pandemic and everything closed down, and we weren't able to host retreats or workshops anymore. And that I remember in that year I moved back to Orcas Island to live in an apartment by myself, and that was also nice. It was the first time I lived by myself for a while, and a lot of growth came through that too. I did a lot of hiking, something I didn't mention before, but hiking and backpacking and camping were big parts of my journey, and I think helped me in more ways than I recognized. Like going outside and just being in nature and being in natural environments and the vast wilderness, and also being on certain hikes where I could see the city from a tall peak, and I could see all of this nature and just this tiny little city and think, wow, some people spend their whole lives in this tiny little city and their minds are just in the city and thinking about city things and their city problems. And if I think it's really important for all of us to take time to go out into nature, to get away from the city and from our civilization and our cultural ways of thinking, and just go back to a forest or a desert and just be and just see life there. Because all of the times that I've done that, that's helped me start to wake up more to that interconnection of everything. Like if I spend a day in the forest just sitting, start to really feel that sense of interconnection. The trees are all connected with the mycelium and the different plants and bugs and water and streams and the animals, and they're all coexisting interconnectedly, sharing this earth we all are. And humans have just forgotten this, or somehow have created all of these artificial environments that have prevented us from recognizing that our dependence on nature and from honoring it. So I wanted to mention that as well. And two other travel experiences that were really significant for me was last year I went to Japan, and that was really beautiful to be in that country. I did a backpacking trek, and then I spent a night in the Eheji Zen monastery, and it was an interesting blend of being in nature and the rural side of Japan and the country, and being in the city in Tokyo and all of the stimulation there. And the other experience, well, I feel like I don't have too much to share about Japan because it was overall just beautiful. It's a beautiful culture, a beautiful country. I had many nice experiences being there, but nothing too significant spiritually. More recently, I went to Colombia in this last December, and I made a documentary about the experience as well, called Journey to the Heart of the World, or Journey to the Center of the World, Journey to the Heart of the World. I get this mixed up, because there's a place in Colombia, four tribes in Colombia, really, the Arhuaco, the Kogi, the Wiwa, and the Canguamo, and these four tribes live in this area called the Black Line, and it's in the mountains of Colombia, and they refer to it as the heart of the world. And their belief is that this is the first place where the world was created, and from that place it was like mirrored outward. So it was the first kind of fractal, and from there the world just fractaled out into all these different varieties, but that was the heart of it. And so they feel that their duty is to preserve and protect the heart of the world because it has a direct effect on the rest of the world. And so they see themselves as these guides and these keepers and protectors of nature as a whole, but specifically this part of nature. And unfortunately, their environment is being, and their heart of the world territory is being rapidly deforested and mined for the resources that are in those mountains. And there was even legal recognition that this is their indigenous land, but it's still being destroyed, and people are still illegally selling it and putting cell towers on it and developing it. And it's heartbreaking to these people that have lived in this place and really value the importance of this place. And it's unfortunate that has happened and is happening all over the world. So many native cultures and indigenous people that were connected to their environment have been displaced by colonization and this disease that modern humans have, of this idea of being separate from nature, and like nature is something we need to conquer instead of something that we are to live in harmony with. And anyways, I have this friend that has been spending the last, I think, 5 years living with them and trying to advocate for them and try to grow awareness to their cause and protect their land. And so they had this retreat where the Arwako tribe invited him to invite certain people to come down and witness their way of life and what they are experiencing there, and to hear their teachings and their worldview. And so I was very fortunate to go down there last December and spend 2 weeks living with this tribe in the jungle in a very remote location in Colombia, and hearing daily teachings from the chief Boom Kwanimaku, sharing really many things, but ultimately that we are nature, and really drilling that point home that we are nature and that we come from and depend on the natural world, but our minds have become, we've built this artificial world, and so we have an artificial mind, or he also referred to as the dark mind, and people get caught in this artificial way of thinking, this artificial mind, and this artificial civilization, or this artificial world, and in doing so, we don't realize our connection to the natural world, and we start harming it, we start destroying it, and not realizing that we're just destroying ourselves. So it was beautiful to see a true embodiment of that harmony with nature in a way that I have not seen. So there's so many paths, so many traditions, so many teachings, and they all have so much beauty in them, but I don't think any have embodied that as fully as the indigenous cultures around the world, because they were indigenous to that land. They depended on nature. They lived with nature. So no matter how much philosophy or spiritual teachings we may have, if that living embodiment isn't there, there's still a disconnect. And so that was really just amazing to see people still living that way. And it gave me a lot of inspiration to want to also defend nature even more, and to live a life that's harmonious, which is really challenging in our modern world. We get very caught in the ways of our artificial world. So yeah, I could go on and on on and on about that one. Just taking a moment to breathe. There's really so much as I'm sharing about all this, that for one, it's non-linear. I'm trying to share it as linearly as possible, but it's not just a linear thing. The journey has been all over the place, and there have been many beautiful aspects to it and many challenging, painful aspects to it. And some of the most challenging and painful ones, I think, are dealing with, figuring out how to be with and manage my mind and my emotions and myself. Because through that conditioning, through my life, my upbringing, I've developed very conditioned ways of being and thinking and perceiving and feeling, and those also tie directly into my place in society and family and culture and identity and all these kind of things that, as much as all of this outward travel and experiences helped me, it did also make me realize that no matter where I go, there I am. So whether I'm in Peru or Colombia or Nepal or China or wherever, I am taking myself and all of my inner stuff with me. And those places may distract me for a time, they may help me heal a certain aspect of myself, and certainly have, but it really reinforced more than anything that the journey is within. And it's kind of paradoxical or ironic that it took me all of this external traveling to realize that it's ultimately inward. The journey, really, of spiritual awakening is primarily within. And the challenge I feel within is there are all of these layers of conditioning, of habits, of ways of thinking, of ways of relating, of things that I identify with, of beliefs that I have about myself and about reality, and all of those shape my experience. And not only is it challenging enough to try to understand, heal, let go of some of those aspects of being to transform and grow into new ways of being, but to do so in the context of a society that is so disconnected from our true nature is also another layer of complexity that makes it extremely challenging. Because one thing I didn't mention in this journey, because again, it's kind of all over the place because there's so many aspects to it, is I met a teacher. His name is also Joseph, and he's a wonderful human being who I met when I worked at a health food store. I worked in the organic produce section at a health food store, and this gentleman would come in and we'd kind of talk here and there, and then he asked if I wanted to join him for some coffee, and I did, and we had a very powerful conversation. He is in his 70s and has a lot of wisdom to share, and he was very instrumental to helping me in my journey. And more so than any individual human being, was one that I could talk with and relate with on these deeper concepts. I could have truly deep conversations and personal expressions, and he would understand what I was talking about even more than I did, and be able to talk about it further and point me in the direction of, he never really just outright told me things, but would just very masterfully ask me questions and help me to come to my own understandings and insights. And often he would help me see my own ego and how annoyingly, frustratingly I was in my ego about things. And he'd point it to me and we'd realize it, we'd have a big laugh about it and just laugh about the human experience. And it's something that he values, I value, he's helped me see the value of, is humor. Having a sense of humor and the ability to laugh at ourselves and the journey, because it can be and is very painful. There are a lot of aspects of our journey that are painful, and it's because it invites us to be with parts of ourselves that we are scared of, parts that we're denying or resisting or overwhelmed by, and to learn how to be with those and face them and sit with them and understand them and go beyond them. It's very challenging and very painful to do, and often feels very lonely because it's something we do within ourselves, often again in a culture that doesn't really support or understand that. So he's been very instrumental for me in helping me in a lot of ways. And one of the things that he has helped me to understand or see is, well, for one, as one grows on this journey of awakening, our perception of reality changes, and our perception of ourselves changes. So who we think we are, who we've been raised to believe that we are, who we feel ourselves to be, typically in life is not actually who we are. And that's a big thing I think about the spiritual journey in general, is it's this waking up to the truth of who we are, waking up out of the conditioning that and the hypnotization of our culture, to wake up to more fundamental reality to our being and of who we actually are. And that requires this willingness and to let go of these different aspects of our being that we have mistaken ourselves to be. So anyways, as we grow, our perception changes, and as our perception changes, our definitions for things change, and it becomes harder and harder to communicate with other people as the gap between our perception increases. When my perception is far different from the average person, it becomes really hard to communicate with the average person especially about things that I'm experiencing from that level of perception. And so it can feel really lonely and challenging on this journey of awakening, and so much so that some people just give it up and decide not to pursue it anymore and just go back to the way things were. But I think if you really have an awakening, experience, you can't really do that. Like the quote that I shared earlier, a mind that is stretched by new experience can never go back to its old dimensions. So when our mind has been open to a certain reality, now it's open to that reality, and we can't turn that off. We can't, shut it down and go back to the way that things were, because we see them differently now. And that only continues to happen, and that what we see and how we see continues to change and become very different from where other people are. And so something he also pointed out to me that I've found really useful and come back to is that this idea that human beings have one emotional need, and that is the need to feel loved. And we will distort our perception in so many ways to try to meet this need of feeling loved. It's humorous and embarrassing to admit to ourselves just how much this shows up, but really useful to recognize too, in that a lot of the things we do or don't do are because we desire to feel loved, or we are afraid that we won't feel loved. So this shows up a lot on this inner journey, because as we wake up and as our perception changes, and we begin to change and become different from in our perception and way of life from that of the ordinary person, we often risk not feeling loved by those people. So for example, let's say, the way that one is raised in their family, in their community, they all are kind of on the same wavelength of thought and see and think and perceive things in a certain way. And everything's fine as long as you share that perception and way of thinking. But if you have an experience that changes your way of thinking, and you start to express this different perspective, this different way of looking at things, it can make people feel uncomfortable, because their whole life and worldview is based on this one way of thinking and perceiving. And you come in to try to tell them, hey, actually, that's not the way things are. And who you believe yourself to be is not actually who you are. These kinds of things. That's often met with this cognitive dissonance, that information feels like a threat to one's sense of self, and so they subconsciously push it away. And in that process, also, they can push people away, or we can feel pushed away. Like, people look at us weird, they look at us strange, they don't want to be around us anymore because we, or how we're thinking or talking, makes them feel uncomfortable. And so we don't feel loved. And that pain of not feeling loved, or not feeling like we belong, on a very human emotional level, can feel so painful, so uncomfortable, that we will go back to, or we will keep quiet, we'll not express those things, we'll try to fit in, just so that we can feel loved, so we can feel like we belong. And that only continues to show up again and again, this fear of we fear continued growth, because we're afraid that we won't feel loved if we continue to change. If I continue to grow, will other people understand me? Will they still love me? Will they talk to me? Will I even know who I am? There's all these fears that come up, and I think fear ends up being one of the biggest obstacles on the journey overall. It's just many and many layers of fear that arise and prevent us from deeper and deeper growth. And I think until one can accept oneself with love, we're going to often be at the mercy or feeling this fear of feeling loved by others. And it's important to recognize that it's very human and natural. As my mentor shared, it's the one emotional need that we have. And he always emphasizes it's an emotional need, because we need to feel loved for part of our well-being. But that love, on a deep level, can come from within. When we accept ourselves with love and we connect with that deeper dimension within ourselves that's one with everything, then we feel love. We are filled with love from within in our hearts for everyone and everything. And when we feel that love, that need to feel loved is met from within. We don't really depend or care if other people love us or not, if they're kind to us or not, if they understand us or not, because we're just in love. And that's a really beautiful state to be in, but a difficult one to maintain, because of so many of these mental patterns and fears and things that can challenge us. So I guess why I'm bringing this up, other than I just find it valuable, is that shows up a lot on the inner journey. All of these layers of fear, all of these fears that I won't be accepted or I won't be loved if I talk about this or I share this or I pursue this, or just many, many layers of that continue to come up. And I think that's one of the very challenging aspects of the inner journey, is just these emotions, these moods, these thought patterns, the things that we're very attached to, the beliefs that we hold on to for our sense of self. Awakening invites us to look at that all honestly and question it and ask, is it true? And that question, if you really dive into that, will take you the whole way, and it will be very uncomfortable but very liberating to keep diving in and asking all of these questions, all these beliefs, things that you think are true, to really ask, is it true? Is that the truth, the deepest truth? And especially as it pertains to ourself and our sense of self. Think of just how many things we identify with on many different layers and levels, typically on a subconscious level. But we identify with our name, with our culture, with our society, with our community, our nationality, our religion, our political beliefs, the interests we have, the celebrities and bands and music and things that we like. So many things we will latch onto for a sense of identity, and we will say, I am this, or I am that, I am a Republican, or I am a Democrat, I am a American, or I am an Indian, I am a Christian, or I am a Muslim, I am a this, I am whatever it may be. I am a man, I am a woman, I am straight, I am gay, I am, white, I am black, I am all of these things that we identify with and feel that we are. Our sense of self is invested in them. And yet, on a true level, or I could ask that question, is that true? Is it true that you, the you that feels yourself as you and is experiencing and perceiving in this moment, is it true that you are a name, that you are a nationality, that you are a race or a religion or a political belief? Maybe that's an aspect of your personality or something you agree with or identify with, but is it you? Is it the truth of you and who you are? And as we continue to inquire, we realize, no, it's not. I'm not my name. That doesn't define me, ultimately. Maybe socially, but not ultimately. I am not my religion. I'm not my political beliefs. I'm not my likes and dislikes. I'm not my beliefs or my memories or my past experiences. I am. So I am not this or that, but I am. And when we can really peel back the layers of identity to this presence of being that I am, we connect with this aspect of our being that is pure being, pure consciousness, pure awareness. And that is the most fundamental reality to all of our being. Whether it's a human being, an animal being, an insect being, there is the being, the consciousness within, that's at the source of all life and the source of our life. And we can wake up to that within ourselves, and then we can perceive that in everyone and everything. And that's where love, on the true sense, capital L love, comes from. It's seeing yourself in others, or seeing the self that we all are in everyone and everything. And that just fills our being with love, with compassion, with kindness and care for all living beings, because we are all of this same self, this same energy and love. And it's the deepest truth, I think, that we can wake up to and embody in our lives. And even when we get glimpses of it, it's challenging, because we continually get thrown off by our thinking, by this mind that is conditioned to believe itself as being separate from everyone and everything and perceives through that lens. So this takes me back to that expression of the mind being this trickster, and our true beingness being always here, but the mind is always pulling us into its distractions and into its thoughts and into its fantasies and imaginations and mental states and beliefs, and we tend to get very carried away by those. And so much so that a significant amount of people live their entire lives lost in their thoughts and ideas, and don't ever wake up to this deeper presence that they are, or even just the reality of the present moment, which is where we wake up to that presence that we are. And so I think I remember one of my ayahuasca experiences, I broke out in tears and cried and just felt so much healing, because I was so thankful that I, in my life, especially as young as I am, have been blessed to experience the truth in this way, the truth of God, of spirit, of this presence, that just feeling it and being aware of it, and the value of it, it just brought me to tears and in gratitude and humility. And it makes me have so much compassion for everyone that doesn't have an awareness of this, that suffers because of their mind without recognizing that it is their mind that's causing their suffering, not recognizing this deeper presence within them where peace is always available, where we can relax and rest in this beingness and this presence and this bliss and joy and contentment that is our being. So many people don't have any sense of that, and they suffer so much from their mental states, from their stress and their anxiety and their fear and their depression and their sadness and their craving and their lust and their addictions and all of this stuff that is like the stuff that we work with and work through in this journey of awakening and healing. I see that suffering. I know it well from my own suffering, and I see it in other people, and it just fills my heart and makes me want to help other people be free of their suffering. And that's what I think this whole journey has really brought me to, is this desire to do what I can to help other people be free of their suffering. And I try to do that through books, I try to do it through videos, I try to do it through documentaries, through Instagram posts, through daily interactions and conversations, and in every way that I can to try to be a beacon of love and light to other humans, other beings, to just offer kindness in this very complex, chaotic world with all of this infinite stuff and expressions and things going on. I want to be a hand reaching out in support. Like, I'm here for you. You're safe. You're not alone on this journey. So that's what's coming through in this moment, and makes me just want to bow with gratitude to you, whoever is watching or listening this, to express that same sentiment of love, and that if you are on your own journey, and if you need support on that journey, or community, or someone to talk with, or message, or something, I am here. I am here to support you on this journey, and I don't want you or anyone to feel alone, but I do also acknowledge that there's an aspect to this journey that is very alone. It's very inward, because it's something we have to do ourselves. I have to awaken myself. Nobody can wake me up. You have to awaken yourself. Nobody can do it for you. But we can support each other on this journey. And I think that's a very beautiful thing, and something I really aspire to provide more of, because it's something I didn't have when I started to wake up, and something I think would have been really valuable if I did have it. So I think something I want to lean into here that's coming up in this conversation is that suffering. I think that's one of the main themes that I've come to recognize in this spiritual path. And it's no surprise to me that it was the Buddha that taught about this first and foremost. He was very unique in his teachings, because most traditions and spiritual paths or religions, they speak about this one truth, the spirit, this God, and it's very beautiful, and they're pointing to something extremely important. But what the Buddha did was different, in that he said he didn't acknowledge or deny the existence of God. He said that he focuses on suffering and finding freedom from suffering, and that's all that he focuses on and teaches, is the fact that we are suffering, that suffering exists, and that suffering, these are the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. Suffering exists, that there is a cause to suffering, and that there's a possibility of being free of suffering by removing the cause of suffering, and there's a path to do so, the Eightfold Path. And ultimately it has to do on this level of mind, where it's, as the Buddha taught it, we suffer because of our craving and our attachments, And as long as we are craving and desiring and clinging to things, we are resisting this flow of life. And so we are creating suffering and tension for ourselves. And until we're able to remove that cause of craving and clinging to things in our experience, we can relax into and let go. It's kind of one of the big emphasis in Buddhism, is letting go of our attachment and clinging, to relax into the present moment deeply without clinging or craving for anything else, because that allows for us to be in harmony with our experience. Otherwise, we're resisting our experience and creating tension. It's like if you're walking upstream in a very powerful river, as long as you're walking up the stream, it's very challenging and difficult and you're struggling. But as soon as you let go, you just get carried by the river effortlessly. And so in many ways, internally, we are fighting against our experience by holding on and pushing away. We cling to what is pleasant, we push away what is unpleasant. And a lot of Buddhist mindfulness trainings are teaching us to relax, noticing that pleasant and unpleasant are a cycle, a continual flow. Things are pleasant, and then they're unpleasant or neutral. And life is always like that, because life is always changing. So if every time something becomes good we cling, and every time it's bad we push, then we're just clinging and pushing and clinging and pushing, when we could just relax and recognize that it's pleasant now, and that's beautiful. It's painful now, and it will pass. It's pleasant now, it's beautiful. And just being in that flow of the present moment and letting go, one can be in this realm of nirvana, which nirvana directly translates to blowing out. It's a deep letting go in our experience. And what we're letting go into is that mindfulness, is that presence, that awareness. But he doesn't talk about it like that so often. Certain forms of Buddhism do. They speak about our Buddha nature, this awakened part of ourselves. And so it's just a different approach to that. But I think in my journey of trying to understand suffering and what causes it, there's a very root fundamental cause. And the Buddha said it was attachment and craving, and that is true, but I think there's a deeper layer than that causes us to cling and attach and desire in that way. And I'm certain, was aware of this, and certain Buddhist teachings speak of it, especially in Dzogchen and Tibetan Buddhism, and Zen touches on it, and many different traditions do. And ultimately what they're pointing to is that it is the ego. It is this sense of self. There are many different definitions for ego and what it is. And one that I think is useful is that the ego is our sense of being a separate self. And it has a function. It's not a bad thing. It's not something we need to kill and destroy, but something to understand and to not identify with, because that's the problem, is we identify with the ego, and in doing so we become unaware of our true identity. And so we, being identified with the mind and ego, suffer with the mind and ego. When there is pain or when there's anger, we feel like we are angry. When there's sadness, we feel we are sad. When we have happiness, we feel we are happy. And we're just identifying with all of these mental, emotional states, not realizing that they are just thoughts, emotions, mental, emotional states. So we're unaware of that deeper presence within us. We're so caught up in the content of our experience and the mind that is identifying with our experience that we overlook the very source of mind, the space in which experience is happening. Another really good analogy, I think, for this is to consider a movie screen. So the screen of a movie is always there. Even the screen that you're watching this on. This is perfect. So this screen that you're seeing things on, there is always the screen there. But because of the images on the screen, we don't really notice the screen. We see the images. Like right now you see me moving weird. and if you're only focused on me moving weird and the sense of that, you don't notice the screen that this is being played on. And in the same way, in our experience, we have this awareness that is like the screen. And in that screen are all of these images, thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And we get so immersed by them. We're so fascinated by them and distracted and caught up in them that we don't see the presence of awareness in which all of these are happening. And that presence of awareness always is. And it's there whether we're aware of it or not. But whether we're aware of it or not makes a huge difference in whether we suffer or not. Because when we aren't aware of it, we get carried away by our experience and we identify with the part of us that feels itself to be a separate self. And in doing so, underlook this deeper reality of the self, like a capital S self that we are. So this is where I think spirituality and spiritual concepts can get very heady and subtle and nuanced, but still what this is pointing to is so fundamental and important in that we have this separate sense of self, this ego, that really feels itself to be separate from everyone and everything. And because of that, we often feel very alone in the world. On a deep existential sense, most people feel very alone and separate from everyone and everything, and so feel alienated and isolated, and then develop protection and barriers that create fear from other things, and that can manifest as aggression and even violence and harm and neglect of others and their experiences, neglect of nature, harm to nature. And then at the root of it, it's all this sense of being separate from everything, which is not true. And as long as we feel ourselves to be separate from everything, we suffer internally, and we also, through our actions, create suffering externally, because we're acting from this place of separation. So we're only focused on me and my experience, and it's me versus the world, and it's all about how I can better improve me, and it becomes the story of me, and everyone's so caught up in their story of me, not realizing that it's just a story, it's just an idea, it's just a concept we have about ourselves, and it's not this deeper fundamental reality that we are. And that problem of ego creates suffering in ourselves, creates suffering in the world, and it's the reason the world is the way it is now is out of ignorance of our true nature, because we don't realize who we are, and we don't realize our actual fundamental unity. We get caught in this perception of separation and identifying with this idea of being a separate self, and then we create all of this disharmony through our actions. Now, how can I pollute and harm nature if I really feel and understand that I am nature? How can I cause pain and intentionally be mean or unkind to someone when I see myself in them? It's only because of this sense of separation, and we see us seeing through that lens, that we act so disharmoniously. And typically not out of a desire to act disharmoniously, but just of an overemphasis on oneself, focusing only on one's personal gain, often at the expense of others. We can get away with that on a small scale, but when we scale that up to 8 billion humans and all of these big corporate organizations that are still operating on that premise, it leads to a very chaotic state that we're now experiencing. But imagine if someone wakes up to the love and truth of their oneness, if they wake up to who they are and have that understanding of oneness and begin to act from that place where they are considerate of how their actions are affecting the whole that they are a part of, when they desire to act with kindness, with generosity, with compassion, with empathy, with understanding, with wisdom, then scale that up to 8 billion people. Scale that to the corporations and organizations of the world, and imagine what a different world we can have. So that is that is the real essence of what I feel this whole journey is about. It's waking up from misperceptions about ourselves, about life that we have adopted from our conditioning. It's waking up from that and waking up to a deeper reality of who we are, of what life is, of this truth of our oneness, and the reality of the present moment. This is where we realize all of this. Instead of, it's not something we realize off in the future or when we can think about it in the right way. It isn't on this level of thinking or mind really at all. Maybe that plays like a 10%, 1 to 10% role, but more so, it's an experiential waking up. It's on this level of our experience, just being fully aware in the present moment, then when we are fully aware in the present moment, there's just presence. There's just this being that everything is and is a part of, and that we are. There's not me here and the world out there, the subject and the object. There's just one presence of being that we are, and we access that fully in the present moment. And mindfulness and meditation in their essence, I think, are training us to be in the present moment, to relax and stay here now in the moment without getting carried away by our thinking, by our minds. And so it's a training in learning how to bring our awareness back to the present moment and let go of the preoccupation with thinking. And it's a training in relaxing into our true nature of awareness and presence. And in one sense, I think meditation and mindfulness are, while in one sense they're practices and trainings, in another, meditation and mindfulness, it's who we are. Meditation is not something we do, it's something that we are. Because when we are meditating, we're just being ourselves and allowing ourselves to be ourselves in the present moment. And that changes everything in how we relate to our experience. It allows us to be with whatever we're feeling. It allows us to be present with our lives, with other people, instead of the clinging and the pushing away and the thinking and fighting and resisting and all this mental suffering that we create. It's relaxing into this ability to be with our experience fully. So I feel like I can just rant and be inspired and share on all this stuff forever, indefinitely, and I suppose for as long as I'm in this body, I intend to, but not for this video. I don't want to drag this on for too long. I wanted to get on here and share about my journey and express, and I feel like I've done that, and trailing off into some other aspects of things that relate to it, but I'm really thankful. I'm really thankful for life and the life experience that I've had, and I feel like when I was 16, I was really graced with an experience of truth, and it wasn't something that I was necessarily seeking. It was something that was given to me, and I feel so fortunate and blessed to have received that gift, and I want to use it to share with others truth, to share love, to share wisdom and compassion and kindness and all of these things that I think are fundamental to our own peace and to the peace of humanity and of all beings. So thank you for listening to me share about my journey, however much you have listened to, and I hope that I was able to share something valuable for you. I hope that you can relate it to your own journey, to certain insights that hopefully you can take and apply to yourself. Excuse me. And yeah, I would love to hear if any of this related with you, if you have aspects of your journey that you are struggling with or have found insight into. Please share in the comments so I can see them, so other people can see them, so that we can have a dialogue about the very personal experience of awakening and how that shows up for you, what themes that you've struggled with or noticed or been able to navigate or move through or would give advice to other people. I would love to create a dialogue about this. So feel free to create comments, to give feedback, to share your thoughts and opinions. They're very much valued and appreciated by me, and I'm sure whoever else reads them. So thank you again for taking the time to listen and to hear my story. I would love to hear more of your story, and I hope that my story has added value to your story. And may we continue to wake up, may we continue to awaken to the truth of who we are, to the truth of our oneness, and in doing so wake up from the misperception of separation and the suffering that that causes, so that we can be free, live in freedom and peace and love, and so that we can spread that outwards and help humanity as a whole to live in freedom and peace and love. So that is my wish. May we continue to walk this path and support each other on our own unique journeys. Much love.